In this episode, we look at weathering the underside of a freight car, the end of the freight car, this, that, and the other, quality photos,
and I end up just taking a picture.
We look at another use for the Tamiya washes.
This stuff is magical.
And dive into who the architect is of the GN of 1970.
I never said that I was the architect.
So kick back, roll an axle, and maybe you'll accidentally learn something on this episode of the GN 1970.
70s.
I want to take you through one of the most underwhelming tasks of weathering, and that's the underside of a freight car. And you say to yourself,
why even bother on the underside of a freight car? Nobody sees it unless there's a derailment.
And if somebody's admiring your weathering of the underside of a freight car after you had a derailment,
I think there's some other questions that need to be answered first.
But when we really do look at this, I did dull coat this car so the chalk that's being applied will be able to bite to it. My end goal when weathering the underside of, in this case, a hopper car, is to just get an even coat of gray. Sometimes I do the wheel splatter. I do add a few other nicks and dings on the underside of the car, but in reality, because it's a hopper and you can kind of see the bays, all I'm really trying to do is just kind of knock them down so they're not as bright. But other than that,
that's kind of it. It's time to test that 8-pound hunk of weight that you haul around on your shoulders. That's right, it's quiz time.
Even though covered hoppers were far superior to boxcars for hauling grain, the GN owned a large boxcar fleet, and covered hoppers, while they were relatively expensive, replacing the newer boxcars was not deemed a good business decision. Which car maker produced these Big Sky Blue hoppers? Was it A. Magor, B. ACF, C. GAT Corp, or D. Pullman Standard? We'll find out later in this episode.
Well, look here, the end cages of a hopper car.
I had a lot of you guys asking about the end cages of the hopper car and why I didn't cover it in the past. Well, I need a little bit more time, and now we've got more time. Again, the car has been fully dull coated. I am using a wider bristled brush here to be able to start applying the Doc O'Brien's weathering powders, but I end up switching over to either a number 3 or 4 on the round brush and going for a soft bristled brush. You want something that's pliable to work into the details as you're moving along throughout the model, trying to be as gentle as possible. I work in a circular motion, as well as I'll spin the brush just in between my fingers to be able to get the brush to kind of flatten out. The real key when working within the end cages, especially around the brake detail, is to go easy on it.
You don't need to manhandle it and squash everything. Just get the chalk on the brush and just work it into areas and take your time.
Your end goal again here is trying to get that overall knockdown effect where you're knocking down the brightness of the factory gray. So I'll leave it at that and we'll watch the rest of this get weathered. So that works the insides of the cages. Now we work a little bit more on the outside the cages. Now here's where I switch over to what I call the stubby brush. The stubby brush is actually just a more dense brush to be able to create, in this case, the wheel splatter. You can use the micro brushes, you can use the soft brush, but in this it's a little bit more of a controlled line that I'm really trying to define. So I'm using a little bit of black, I use a little bit of the grungy gray, and I work it in just trying to give it that look of the wheel splatter. So I'll let you kick back and enjoy a little bit of wheel splatter weathering.
And a little bit of tunes. Oh, this the wheel splatter boogie, and that's how you get your underside dirty. Rub your brush and chalk and then smear it on your underside. Thank you very much.
Well, that's kind of the gist of end cage weathering and the wheel splatter. I touch up just a little bit more by cleaning up the excess chalk. But that technique is what I used for all of these cars. It varies a little bit from one to another just based on the amount that you add. So the more you add, the more you got. The less you add, the less you got.
Thanks, John Madden.
Here's a Minneapolis Northfield and Southern PS4000. This particular car is a Pullman standard car made by Tangent Scale Model. I recently weathered it up and I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw it on the railroad, take a few pictures of it so I can post them on the old interweb. In the process of doing so, I figured I would show you guys the steps I take or things I look at when taking a photo of a scale model. In this application, put like type cars around it and then also find a nice angle and just take a shot. I think that's not too bad. I don't really care for the angle, so I'm going to shoot it from the other direction. A little bit better, but I don't like all the clean cars, so I am going to swap those out and put weathered cars around it, so the thing looks like it's in a little bit more of a natural state. A little bit better. Still not great. I'd like to get rid of that blue tape, so I put it on a diorama that had some scenery on it. Now we're looking a little bit better.
What camera do you use?
Well, the camera that I use is just the camera on the iPhone. And in this process, I open up the app, I go to photo, and I end up just taking a picture. Once I've taken the picture, I'll zoom in and look at it. And if I look at it and I think, the background's still a little too soft, what can I do to improve that? Well, I do use a different app for taking pictures. This app is called Camera Pixels. It allows you also to focus bracket. And you say,
What's focus bracket?
well, it's taking a series of images. In this particular application, you can go in there and go to mode, go to focus bracket, and you're going to set this thing up to be able to take the best pictures you can. I set the resolution to max. I set the crop to 16:9 because that's similar to what our TVs or computers are set to. I make sure the quality is at full. I do turn off their enhanced processing and stabilization. I pick 20 images, and you think,
20 images.
it's going to take 20 shots here. And I do set the timer to 10 seconds because I'm not steady enough to hold it for 20 images.
Steady Eddie.
So I do set it to 10 seconds. I take the shot. I try to make sure it's in position. So I stop shaking. I get my hands off the camera and let the phone do the work. So it's going to take 20 shots here in a row, and you're seeing it go through the focal ranges. It goes from basically foreground all the way through the background. It's taking way more photos than we're going to actually need. I'm going to take those 20 photos, go into the actual Photos app, because that's where it saved them. So I open up the Photos app, and that's what I'm going to go through and look at the 20 images that are in there. And like I said, there's more here than you need, but I'm going to harvest out and find, 5, 6, maybe 7 shots that I know are in focus. As you can see, these are all out of focus. Seems like a waste, but what I'm looking for is to find that full depth of field, making sure that the car in the background is in focus. Now, there is a PS4000 back there. That one's in focus. So I mark it with a little heart. That heart is basically like liking it, and I'm going through now and looking at what ones are in focus all the way into the foreground. We're getting there. I'm going to look at the ladder in the lower right. That's probably close enough. I'm going to call that good. So I will hit a like on this one too, or hit the heart. And then I go between the two. So the one I hit before and the one I hit now, I got to put a heart on each one of those other 5. So I turn on the heart.
Hit it again, and again, and again, and again.
And now we're back to the 7th shot. So now I have 7 shots with hearts on them. Those are just telling me in the photo apps which ones I like. And I'm going to send those to myself onto my computer, just use an AirDrop. That's just a simple way. You can use Google Drive or Dropbox. There's other ways to transfer photos from your phone. But this is just what I use in the application. So I open it up, I go to the Dropbox, I send it to my computer. Now that they've sent, I jump over to my computer, I open up and I look in the downloads folder. Here are those 7 images that we recently just selected out of the phone. I'm going to drag the files to a program called Helicon Focus. This is the program that's going to take stacked focused images and put them in orders. You see I click through and it's basically going foreground to background. And I'm going to then be able to render this as one all sharp image.
Say, what does that mean?
Well, here I hit render. The one on the left is going through the images. The one on the right is the composition that is putting all the images together. And as I look, it's sharp in the foreground. I can look all the way to the back. The M&S is sharp. The hatches are sharp. Everything is sharp where I'm looking for sharpness. So I have an image now that is clean all the way from front to back. in focus. That is a more believable image because in real life, you're going to have that full depth of field or a fuller depth of field. As we look at the before image here, you can see that the softness in the background, and we slowly fade into the image we just created, and we've gotten ourselves now to a fully sharp image.
Oh, here's a 10-second tip.
Washing your exhaust with a little black accent liner. Very simple, little brush, little black, goes a long way.
I'd say that's an improvement.
All right, here's a quick way to be able to take a photo of your model without taking Photoshop, stacking images, transferring images, and doing all those other steps. Line up your shot straight onto the model. Just using your cell phone, take a shot. And one way to spice this up a little bit more is take a piece of cardstock, print out a background. In this application, I'm just using some clouds. Line it up, same thing. Nice straight on shot. Boom. No Photoshop, no stacking, no transferring, no additional information, just nice clean shot of your model and be able to post that online, and it looks pretty good.
This method seemed a lot easier than the other one.
We'll take a look at a few different examples of this simple method. Here's what a before image would look like if you don't put a background in. A very simple, drop in some clouds, and you've got kind of a nice shot.
And hopefully it ups your photography game.
Have you been pacing back and forth, wringing your hands, just waiting for the answer to this week's quiz question?
Honey, sit down!
The answer is D, Pullman Standard.
Yahtzee!
The GN did not operate unit trains as defined by traditional definition on a regular basis, but they did route blocks of cars between specific points on an irregular basis, so
There is that. No unit trains, but somewhat unit trains? Blocked cars, that's what we'll call it.
Modeler Highlights with Cullen Mueller, the architect.
The big one. Oh, it's pulling me in.
one of the key players of creating the GN in 1970 was Mr. Cullen Mueller. He's the gentleman on the far left. You know the guy in the middle and you know the guy on the right. Now the question is how did the guy on the right meet the guy on the left? Well, they were in a band. Clearly, they're not John Bonham or John Paul Jones.
And they didn't meet in a band.
They end up meeting at work back in the mid-'80s, but nonetheless, they end up starting to create the GN in 1970. Cullen was a huge asset in terms of laying out the track plan, as well as providing some of the actual railroad. Wilmer Yard was actually a yard from Cullen's former railroad that was in St. Paul. So it's kind of cool when you look at it. Almost 40 years later, here these two are. Cullen's running his original yard. Well, now here, 20 years later, part of the GN in 1970. It's clear the railroad wouldn't be where it's at without the architect, Mr. Cullen Mueller. He did wire the entire railroad in D.C. and is considering converting it over to steam. I'm not sure if that works, but we do have DCC now up and running. We have a signal system in the process. Now this new power belongs to Max. Max is the director in the corner.
The next Steven Spielberg of railroad videos.
He's in one of the best seats in the house, and we'll actually watch some of the Elcos pulling into the engine facility.
That's all for now. We'll let the traveling cranberries take us out. 70s.
Remember to please like, tag, share, and follow, as well as subscribe to the YouTube channel.
And if you'd like to see the hobby grow, a simple click goes a long way.
Thanks for watching.
You done shoot about as good as you model. Here's Cullen coming at you answering the question of the week. It was asked this week by a fellow named Mark. He says, what kind of locomotive does Cullen like to run on the GN in 1970? Well, for me, it's the old 50. I'd remove every single diesel locomotive they got on that railroad and put nothing but steam.
And that's Cullen answering the questions of the week.
Hopefully you enjoyed the content of this episode. If you want to see more, you can check out more episodes of the GN in 1970, as well as Sue the Milwaukee Road. You can see a tour of the GN in 1970 and even a few other layout tours. Nonetheless, check out the content and hopefully you enjoy that as well as future episodes. Thanks for watching.